My wife cheated while I paid off her student loans, so I walked away quietly. Now she's begging for forgiveness and lost everything she wanted. I'm a 32-year-old guy who truly believed that marriage meant we carried the weight together, but somewhere along the way, I became the silent foundation she stood on while slowly erasing myself. I worked brutal overtime shifts and side gigs, coming home smelling of sweat and metal, just so I could wipe away her crushing student loans and give her the clean start she'd always dreamed about. Every time I slid another payment through, she'd smile and say, "You're so selfless, I don't deserve you," and those words wrapped around my heart like warmth on a freezing night. I watched her walk across the graduation stage, heard our families cheering, and felt this heavy, sacred pride settle in my chest like we'd conquered something holy together. At home, I noticed her laugh felt thinner, her hugs shorter, and her eyes wandered past me like I was part of the furniture. When I asked, "Are you okay, babe?" she'd brush me off with, "I'm just tired, work's intense right now," yet her phone stayed face down and silent. I told myself love meant patience, that devotion meant pushing past unease, even as the air between us felt colder each night. Still, I lay beside her, listening to her slow breathing, convincing myself this was just a phase, a small shadow passing over something beautiful, unaware how deep that shadow was about to fall over everything we built, and how close I already was to losing the woman I trusted more than anyone in the world, even as she turned slightly away from me in the dark, whispering a soft excuse that I chose not to question. And somehow that tiny movement felt heavier than every sacrifice I'd ever made. Leaving a quiet ache I couldn't yet name but somehow feared completely deeply. I'm a 32-year-old guy who started noticing the subtle shifts in her long before anything concrete surfaced, but I convinced myself I was just being paranoid or insecure. She began staying out later, claiming, teen dinners, networking stuff, you know how it is, yet the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne clung to her coat when she kissed my cheek goodnight. When I tried to joke it off and asked, "Should I be jealous of your mysterious coworkers?" she laughed too quickly and replied, "Don't start, you know I only have eyes for you." Inside, something tightened anyway, a quiet instinct I refused to honor because love felt safer than suspicion. Our once lazy evenings turned into silence filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the blue light reflecting off her phone screen. I'd reach for her hand and she'd gently pull away, murmuring, "I'm just exhausted, can we talk later?" But later never came. The warmth in her voice was fading, like a song playing further and further away, leaving me stranded in a space that used to feel like home. I kept replaying her compliments about my sacrifices, wondering when admiration had turned into obligation. At dinner one night, I finally whispered, "Are we okay?" and she smiled without warmth, saying, "Of course we are, stop overthinking everything," yet she avoided my eyes the entire time. My throat felt dry, my chest heavy, but I swallowed the doubt and said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I just worry sometimes," pretending calm while my mind spiraled. As she drifted to the balcony to take another work call, I watched the city lights shimmer outside and felt a hollow echo inside me grow louder, like a warning I was still stubbornly ignoring, unaware that every unanswered question was quietly stacking toward a truth I wasn't ready to face yet, that I'm a 32-year-old guy who felt his entire world tilt on a random Tuesday night I'll never forget. The kind of moment that burns itself into your nervous system. Her laptop was open on the kitchen counter, a soft glow illuminating the dim room while the rain tapped gently against the windows. I wasn't snooping, I swear, I just meant to plug it in when a message notification slid across the screen, and my eyes caught words no husband should ever have to see. "I can't stop thinking about last night," it said, followed by a heart emoji that didn't belong to me. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the edge of the counter just to stay upright. I clicked, and suddenly I was staring into a world that didn't include me at all. There were months of messages, inside jokes, whispered plans, explicit photos, and flirty confessions about how amazing it felt to finally be free around him. Free. That word cut deeper than anything else. My hands trembled as I scrolled through conversations about stolen lunch breaks, secret weekends, and hotel rooms paid for while I was working double shifts to erase her debt. "He has no idea," she had written, followed by laughing emojis, and my chest burned like it was being crushed from the inside. I felt sick, dizzy, like I wasn't even inside my own body anymore. When she walked in, she smiled casually and asked, "Hey babe, why are the lights off?" And I just stared at her, the woman who'd kissed me goodbye that morning, like everything was normal. I managed a flat, "Nothing, just tired," while my mind screamed with a truth too heavy to release. She leaned over, brushing my shoulder, and whispered, "You've been working too hard again," and I nodded, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing, knowing she'd chosen someone else while I paid for the life she pretended to share with me, and every second of silence felt like a slow, irreversible fracture spreading through my heart as I wondered just how long this betrayal had been happening right under my roof. I'm a 32-year-old guy who didn't confront her after that night, not because I wasn't hurt, but because something inside me snapped into a strange, hollow silence. I started watching instead, moving through our apartment like a ghost in my own marriage, studying every detail I'd once ignored. She became more careful with her phone, angling it away whenever I walked past, smiling down at the screen with a softness she no longer reserved for me. When I asked casually, "Everything good?" she'd reply, "Yeah, just work stuff," but her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced saying it in front of a mirror. I noticed how often she'd shower right after coming home late, the steam curling around the bathroom door while she hummed like she had nothing to hide. At dinner, she barely touched the food I cooked, scrolling through messages and whispering, "Sorry, urgent email," before stepping into another room. The air between us felt thick and charged, like the calm before a storm she didn't realize I already knew about. Inside, I was crumbling slowly, each observation carving deeper into the betrayal I wasn't ready to voice. One evening she laughed at something on her phone and said, "God, you'd like him, he's hilarious," and my throat tightened because I knew exactly who him was. I forced a weak smile and muttered, "Yeah. Sounds great," while my heart pounded against my ribs. She kissed my cheek without looking at me and whispered, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," and those words felt poisonous now, coated in a sweetness that made my skin crawl. Every night I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her soft breathing and the occasional buzz of her phone lighting up the darkness, and I wondered how someone could share a bed with you while building a life with someone else. I felt humiliated, invisible, and painfully aware that the woman I loved so fiercely was slipping further into a reality that no longer included me. And as I watched her quietly step outside for another, late call, I felt an unsettling certainty settle in my chest, like the next truth I discovered would be far worse than the last. I'm a 32-year-old guy who thought I'd already seen the worst of it until I stumbled onto something that rewired the entire narrative in my head. It wasn't just cheating, it was planning, calculation, and cold intention. While reviewing our shared cloud for tax documents, I found a folder she must have forgotten to hide, labeled with a bland name that meant nothing to me at first. Inside were screenshots of private messages, not just to him, but to her closest friend, where she wrote, "Once his payments clear my loans, I'm gone, I can't keep pretending forever." My hands went numb, my vision blurring as I read sentence after sentence, breaking me down into a resource, a temporary solution, a bridge she fully intended to burn. She called me her safety net, her stability, her stepping stone, and joked about how convenient it was that I never asked questions. I heard her voice in my head from countless nights, whispering, "You're my rock," and realized how strategic that affection had been. The love I believed in wasn't just broken, it had never existed the way I imagined. I felt my chest tighten as memories replayed, every sacrifice turning sour in hindsight. That evening, she came home cheerful and said, "Guess who might get a promotion soon," and I forced a small smile, replying, "That's amazing, I'm proud of you." She swooped in and hugged me, murmuring, "I couldn't do this without you," and I nearly laughed at the irony slicing through my ribs. Inside, something shifted, a cold clarity settling where my heartbreak used to burn. I wasn't just betrayed emotionally, I was exploited, carefully and methodically, and the realization made my silence heavier than ever. I began seeing her not as my wife, but as someone who had calculated my devotion down to the last dollar. And as she curled beside me later that night, whispering, "I love you," I stared at the ceiling, knowing my next move would change everything, yet she had no idea how close the ground beneath her already was to collapsing. I'm a 32-year-old guy who stopped being her husband the moment that truth settled into my bones and started becoming someone entirely different, someone careful, calculated, and painfully awake. The anger didn't explode the way I always imagined it would, instead it cooled into this sharp, controlled focus that scared even me. I went through our finances late at night, my laptop casting a pale glow across the bedroom while she slept beside me, unaware I was mentally dismantling the life I'd built around her. Every click felt deliberate, every number another step away from the illusion she'd been feeding me for months. I started quiet consultations during my lunch breaks, sitting across from a calm-voiced lawyer who said things like, "You're doing the right thing protecting yourself," and I just nodded, swallowing the weight in my throat. I separated accounts, redirected my direct deposit, and moved important documents into a locked drawer she never opened. When she asked sweetly, "Why are you so distant lately?" I smirked gently and replied, "Just exhausted, work's been brutal," echoing the same excuses she'd been spoon-feeding me for weeks. Inside though, my chest felt like cracked glass, fragile and sharp, but no longer bleeding openly. I replayed every memory, every late shift, every whispered thank you, and I wondered if any of it had ever been real. Sometimes she'd wrap her arms around me and murmur, "Promise me you'll never leave," and I'd freeze for a second before whispering, "I'm not going anywhere," tasting the bitter irony coat my tongue. The apartment around us felt colder, unfamiliar, like a stage where I was playing my final role. I stopped planning with her, stopped imagining futures, stopped saying we out loud. Instead, I imagined empty rooms, silence, and the strange peace of not being someone's fool. And as I watched her laugh at something on her phone, thumb tapping out another message meant for someone who wasn't me, I realized my exit wasn't just inevitable anymore, it was already quietly in motion, even though she still believed the ground beneath her was unbreakable. I'm a 32-year-old guy who chose silence as my final act of control, and the morning I left felt strangely calm, almost unreal. The apartment looked exactly the same, sunlight slipping through the blinds, her favorite mug still sitting in the sink, the faint scent of her shampoo lingering in the hallway like a ghost of normalcy. She was asleep, her face peaceful, and for a split second I wondered how someone could rest so easily after quietly destroying another person. I stood there, staring at the woman I'd once called my forever, and felt nothing but a dull ache settling into something colder, more permanent. I packed my essentials slowly, methodically, each folded shirt feeling like a piece of the life I no longer recognized. The lease documents, the lawyer's letter, and a simple note rested on the kitchen counter. "You know what you did. I'm choosing myself now." No blame, no explanation, just truth. My hands trembled as I set down my keys, the metallic clink echoing through the silence like a final punctuation mark. As I opened the door, she stirred and murmured, "Babe," her voice thick with sleep, and for a second my heart twisted out of old instinct. I paused, swallowing hard, answering softly, "Get some rest," even though my chest burned with everything I didn't say. She mumbled, "Where are you going?" and I forced calm into my breath, replying, "Somewhere I should have gone a long time ago." The confusion in her eyes flashed briefly before sleep seemed to pull her back under, unaware that her safety net was already unraveling. The hallway outside felt colder, emptier, but every step away from that door felt heavier and lighter at the same time, like grief and relief tangled together in my spine. I walked down the stairs, each footfall echoing against the concrete, and kept thinking how easy it was for endings to arrive without noise. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with her first message, "Where did you go? Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of everything I'd held inside for so long, knowing her realization was only just beginning, and what came next would not be quiet. I'm a 32-year-old guy who thought leaving would feel like falling, but instead it felt like standing at a distance and finally seeing the full collapse I'd been shielding her from. I stayed at a small furnished place downtown, the walls bare and unfamiliar, but the quiet felt oddly honest for the first time in years. My phone kept lighting up with her name, message after message stacking into paragraphs of confusion and panic. "Please call me. Did I do something wrong? Why would you just leave like this?" The irony sat heavy in my chest, because she already knew exactly what she'd done. Friends I'd slowly grown distant from started reaching out, updating me without being asked. She showed up crying at work today, one whispered over the phone, said you abandoned her without warning. I could almost picture it, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the pressure of reality. Without my steady income and scheduled payments, the weight of her remaining debt started closing in fast. She texted again, more desperate now, the bank called, something's wrong with the account. Can you just explain what's happening? And I felt a cold stillness settle through me. I imagined her sitting alone in our apartment, surrounded by the life I no longer supported, realizing the stability she took for granted had disappeared overnight. When her coworker, the one she'd risked everything for, failed to suddenly become her hero and instead pulled away under pressure, I knew the fantasy had shattered completely. I overheard through mutual connections how she'd been snapping at people, missing deadlines, breaking down in restrooms between meetings. One night my phone rang again, her voice trembling now as she whispered, I don't understand, I thought we were okay, please just tell me where you are. The sound of her crying used to break me, but now it echoed hollow, stripped of power. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, noticing how tired my eyes looked, how thin the line of my mouth felt, yet how something inside me finally felt steadier. And as the messages grew more frantic, more broken, I realized I wasn't watching her fall out of revenge. I was watching her finally face the consequences she'd carefully avoided for so long, and I knew soon her pain was going to demand an answer I wasn't sure I was ready to give yet. I'm a 32-year-old guy who realized just how far her world had fallen the night she showed up outside my building unannounced, soaked from the rain and barely holding herself together. I saw her through the lobby glass, mascara streaked down her cheeks, hair tangled, designer coat hanging loosely off her shoulders like she'd forgotten who she used to be. When I stepped outside, she looked up at me with red, trembling eyes and whispered, please. I don't know what to do anymore. The woman who once laughed about my ignorance now stood in front of me like a stranger, fragile and unraveling. They cut my hours, she choked out, fingers clutching her phone like a lifeline, and the payments. I can't keep up, everything's collapsing. Her voice cracked on every word, each syllable soaked in panic and disbelief. I said nothing, just watched as she took a shaky step closer and murmured, he said he doesn't want to deal with this mess, he stopped answering my calls. The coworker who felt so worth betraying me for had vanished the moment reality arrived, leaving her alone inside the consequences she refused to imagine. I made a mistake, she sobbed, reaching for my sleeve, I swear I didn't mean for it to go this far. My chest tightened at the sound of her breaking, not from pity, but from the heavy weight of finally seeing her understand what she'd done. You knew exactly what you were doing, I replied calmly, and the softness in my voice somehow made her cry even harder. She sank onto one of the cold concrete steps, whispering, I ruined everything, didn't I? And in that moment, she looked smaller, almost unrecognizable. The rain continued to fall around us, echoing softly against the pavement, and the silence between us felt thicker than the storm. I watched as she buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with raw, unfiltered grief, and for the first time I realized she wasn't crying because she missed me, she was crying because the fantasy she built had finally shattered into something she couldn't escape. As she lifted her head again, eyes searching mine with quiet desperation and broken hope, I knew the words she was about to say would change everything, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear them yet. I'm a 32-year-old guy who stood there in the cold rain listening to her breathe between sobs, knowing what was coming before she even said it. She looked up at me, eyes swollen and desperate, and whispered, please, just let me explain everything, like there was still a version of this where words could rebuild what she shattered. The air smelled like wet concrete and damp fabric, and the faint tremor in her voice echoed through the night like a fragile apology trying to survive the storm. I crossed my arms instinctively, not to shut her out, but to keep my own heart from reacting to a face it once loved without limits. I was stupid, I was selfish, she cried, voice breaking, I let him get into my head and I thought I deserved something more exciting than normal. Hearing her reduce our life, our marriage, our years of sacrifice to the word normal hit me harder than any insult could. You told your friend you were waiting until my payments cleared to leave, I said quietly, and her face drained of color like I'd ripped the lie right out of her chest. She stuttered, I didn't mean it like that, I was venting, I swear I never planned, but her defense dissolved into broken silence. I gave you everything, I continued, the words heavy but steady, and you called me temporary stability. She sobbed harder, shaking her head, trying to reach for my hand again. I know I don't deserve it, she whispered, but I still love you, please don't let it end like this. The familiarity of her touch burned my skin when her fingers brushed my sleeve, and I stepped back slowly, creating space she couldn't cross anymore. I could see the fear in her eyes now, real and raw, not because she missed me, but because her safety, her plans, her escape route were gone. I'll go to therapy, I'll fix everything, just give me another chance, she pleaded, voice cracking as tears mingled with rain on her cheeks. I stared at her, feeling the weight of every memory collide with the reality she'd created, and as she waited for my answer with breathless hope trembling in her frame, I realized the decision I made next wouldn't just define her fate, it would define who I was becoming now. I'm a 32-year-old guy who finally understood that real power didn't come from yelling or shattering things, but from standing still and letting the truth exist between us. The rain had softened into a mist, and the streetlight cast a pale glow over her face as she waited, trembling, for my answer. Look at me, I said quietly, and her watery eyes lifted like she was bracing for impact. This isn't about you crying now. It's about the months you laughed while planning your escape. She swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking straight, I was scared, I felt trapped, she murmured, her voice breaking as she searched my face for mercy. You weren't trapped, I replied, my tone steady, almost gentle, you were comfortable using me because you knew I'd never abandon you. The words hung in the damp air, heavier than the silence that followed. She shook her head, whispering, I hate myself for what I did, and I nodded slowly, feeling the strange calm settle deeper. I don't hate you, I told her, and her eyes widened like hope had just flickered back on, but I don't love you the way you think anymore. The realization hit her harder than any scream could have. You didn't just cheat, I continued, you rewrote our marriage into a transaction and called it temporary stability. That's not something tears undo. She stepped closer, voice desperate. So, what are you saying? Is this really over? I exhaled slowly, the night air cold against my lungs, and glanced past her at the blurred city lights, feeling a strange peace I didn't recognize yet. I'm saying the version of me who begged for your love doesn't exist anymore, I said softly. And the version of you who deserved that loyalty made a choice long before tonight. Her lip quivered as she whispered my name again, like a plea, like a prayer, and I felt the old instinct tug at me for just a second. But as that silence stretched, thick and unresolved, I realized the final line I spoke next would determine whether I walked forward alone, or let the ghost of my past pull me back one last time. I'm a 32-year-old guy who finally chose himself, and the moment I said, this is where I stop, something inside me loosened like a wound finally exposed to air. She stared at me, rain clinging to her lashes, and whispered, so you're really leaving me, as if she still thought my boundary was negotiable. I nodded slowly and replied, I left the second you decided I was something to use, feeling the truth land with a quiet, irreversible weight. Her sobs echoed against the curb, mixing with the hum of passing cars and the distant siren somewhere down the street, but my chest no longer tightened at the sound. I stepped back, breathing in the cool night air, and for the first time in months, I felt present in my own skin. Go home, I said gently, and find something that's real, even if it isn't me. She looked at me like she wanted to memorize my face, like grief and regret were finally sharing the same breath. I turned away, each step feeling heavier and freer, my footsteps soft against the wet pavement as the world stretched forward without her shadow attached to my spine. Back at my place, I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to the silence, you survived, like a promise and a reminder. The streetlight filtered through the curtains, painting soft lines across the floor, and I realized healing didn't roar, it arrived quietly, steady, and deliberate. My phone vibrated once more with her name, one final plea blinking on the screen, and I let it fade without answering. I opened the window, let the crisp air roll over my face, and felt a strange, fragile peace take root where pain used to live. Somewhere behind me, the past still whispered my name, but I kept my eyes forward, unsure of what came next, only certain I would no longer betray myself to save someone who already chose to lose me.